Hello, and welcome to the Wade Borth podcast. I'm your host, Wade Borth, and in every episode, my goal is to get you to think differently about how money works and ultimately to empower you to take control of your money and your personal financing system. Hello, and welcome back to the Wade Borth podcast. Today, again, for the fourth time, I believe, Nicole's joining me. We're going to be talking a little bit more about Nelson Nash's book, Becoming Your Own Banker, The Infinite Banking Concept. Wow. But so today we're picking up on the discussion that we had last time, which is the next chapter on page 17 in Nelson's book called The Problem. And I truly believe this is where we need to start. And this is the root of everything that we need to do. It starts from this chapter going forward. And what I mean by that, before I do that, thank you, Nicole, for joining me. I appreciate your time and participation in this process.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoy these conversations a lot.
Good. So hopefully we can get people to take a step back. One of the things that Nelson encouraged us to do is rethink our thinking. And that's really where we're at with people. And I know from my perspective, I'm so excited about this process. I'm so excited about what this can do for us. But I want to jump to the end and find a solution for everybody. That's immediately what I want to do. I'm a fixer, right? So I like to fix stuff. I like to find the solution. But just before we got on, you and I were talking about this idea of, unless people understand what the problem is, they don't even know that they need a fix. It's like that whole idea. If you don't, if you go to the doctor and he prescribes you medication and he has a row of treatment and really just to the extreme, somebody says, hey, we're going to have to amputate your arm. And you haven't even talked to them about what the issue is. You're like, whoa, wait, what's the problem? Why should I do all that unless you can explain to me what the problem is? But if the doctor sits down and says, hey, you have this infection in your arm, it's going to kill you in 3 days, you're going to lose your arm, we're going to put you on antibiotics, we're going to put you in the hospital, then you might say, oh, yeah, I want to get better, so yeah, I'll do what you're telling me to do. But a lot of times, a lot of practitioners, a lot of people in our lives like to jump to the end. And they jump to the end because they know what the solution is, but they need to have you recognize what the problem is at the very beginning. Would you not agree with that, Nicole? That was the conversation we were having.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And I think as practitioners, we see regularly people with the same problems. And so it's easy to spot it because we've seen it many times, but that doesn't mean that person has spotted it in their own life, or they may have a feeling about it, but they just don't know exactly what the problem is.
That's if I've had a number of clients, and I'll pick on the engineers and the CPAs of the world. They're like, oh, hey, send me an illustration. I want to see what this looks like. I'm like, you're looking at the tool, but you have yet to recognize what the problem is. So I just refuse to do that. I'll say we have to understand and diagnose what the problem is before we can find a solution. In other words, it's not fair to you. It's not fair to me. And I think we waste a lot of it. That's why I think this session, this podcast today, it's going to be so huge just because it's going to help people recognize what the problem is, address the problem. And then once they've addressed the problem, admit that there is a problem. They have to come to the conclusion, right at the beginning of the chapter, Nelson quoted a Bible verse in there. He said, when Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he'd been in that condition for a long time, we'll help you identify the problem. That's the very first step. Then we have to come back and say, do you want a solution to that problem? Do you want to get well? And then once they say, yeah, or once we say yeah, because we have to do this in every situation in our lives has a mini portion of this. We have to identify what the problem is and do we want to solve that? What's the process and what's the product? And that should be in that order that we go about doing that. And that's really what this chapter is all about. So one of the things that we get quite a bit, and Nicole, in your position, you probably get this as well. People would say, all I really need to solve is a higher rate of return on my investments. That'll solve all my problems. You ever hear that?
Yes, I hear that all the time. And in fact, you're right. This particular chapter talks about that. And we think that higher rate of return is going to solve all of the problems because, of course, you're going to get this higher rate of return. You're going to have more money and more money.
And I would agree that more cash solves a lot of problems. But if cash was the only solution to problems, then people that won the lottery would always be problem-free.
Yeah. Then everybody solved their problems, and then we wouldn't have as many problems as we do.
Yeah, because we all have the ability to go out and earn this infinite dollar amount that's out there. But it's more along the problem that lies within our ears first. We have to understand how money works and how money flow. And then once we have that understanding, then cash can be the solution. But cash on its own doesn't solve all our problems. Again, I've shared with you, I love the show, How the Lottery Ruined My Life. These people win the lottery and they think, oh, I have the solution. I won all these millions of dollars. I'm not going to have any problems. 2 years later, they're without friends. They're without any money. They're in a worse situation they were before they actually won the lottery. And like, why is that? And it goes back to this whole idea, right? Nelson writes in his book, he says, I would surmise that if we took all the money equally, spread it out equally amongst all the people in the world, that within a handful of years, 5 to 10 years, 90% of the money would be back in 10% of the people's pockets because they understand how money works.
I was just going to say, I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit, but when we were talking about the higher rate of return and how people are thinking that's going to be the solution to their problem, I've also got highlighted in here, it never seems to dawn that the volume of interest is the real issue, not the annual percentage. So I'm skipping ahead, but it just dawned on me at that moment that we think the higher rate of return is the answer, but we never think that the higher volume of interest is the problem.
Yeah, exactly. So let's tear that apart just a little bit here, because I think that's huge. So if we think about it, if we spend, I think Nelson's example in the book on page 17, he was talking about where 20% of our money flows to autos, and then I think 30% flows to housing of our household income, right? And then 40% of our money flows to our living expenses. And then if we're lucky, truly if we're lucky, and we're one of the few Americans that actually saves 10%, that would be amazing, because I don't know that the savings rate is even close to 10%, maybe half that. But let's say it is 10%, just for easy figuring. So let's say you have a family making $50,000. And I know this is a podcast, so I'm not going to get real technical with the numbers, but let's say you have a family making, let's say it's $100,000, and we can save $10,000 per year. What does everybody focus on? They focus on, there's a lot of noise on the TV, a lot of noise in advertising. Well, come to my firm. I can get you, your current advisor is getting you 7%. I can get you 8%. And so there's all this focus. There's all this focus on, I can get you 7% over 6 or 8% over 7. $10,000 that we're actually able to save, which again, I think is a way inflated number, but let's say it's $10,000. I can get you 1% more, right? On that $10,000. That's $1,000 more. So we're taking all the time and the effort and more risk. What's risk? It's just, what's the likelihood of we're going to lose? That's what risk is. We're taking more risk. We're doing some things that maybe we don't want to do to get $1,000 more.
Yeah.
Do that all the time with your clients, I imagine, as well. Or some of your clients, not all your clients. It's their IBC clients as well. But where would they be better served? Maybe to start focusing on, because people focus on the wrong thing.
Yeah. And so thinking about all the places where they have debt that they're actually paying, that they're paying interest on. And you know, Wade, some of this too, just again, sort of thinking through this, in today's world with super low interest rates, people are looking at, so they're going to advisors that are saying, I can give you 1% or 2% more. They're looking at the bank where they can't get any interest. They don't want to put their money in there, but they're perfectly willing to go take out loans and get debt on the books, because they can't save money and get any return for it. So they just spend the money and they pay more for it.
Right. Isn't that interesting how this is, I really believe if people understood the process of banking, again, let's talk about the 4 steps again, right? The first step is recognizing the problem. The second one is coming to the conclusion that, yes, I want to get better. I want a solution. Third is that process. And we're talking about that process a little bit, right? So it's like the process of, when we put it to work, we have to make sure that our cash or whatever it might be is valuable. Because what happens is the current banking structure as it is in the current environment has people thinking that their interest has no value, has zero value. Why is that? It's because they're giving me 0.25% of my money. That's the banking industry telling you it has no value. People of wealth are saying, I got cash. I can go find a great place to put it, right? You know, and so they see their cash as hugely valuable, but then you have to take the banking process and say, now I'm going to apply an interest and a principal payback so we can refill that cash coffers. Because if you're in business, again, Nelson's book is designed to get you to think like a business person and stop you from thinking like a consumer.
Yeah, the banks and the financing institutions have essentially made people think that their cash has no value. And yet clearly their cash does have value because they want it. They want your money. It clearly has value. They just they flipped that around so that you're thinking there's no value in putting my money in a savings account, but I will go take this loan and buy a car or buy a house or buy a boat or whatever.
Exactly. They get us to think that has no value. They want it because they see it's a tremendous value. Why do they find value in that dollar that has no interest earning capabilities? Because they don't put it in a place that earns interest. They let it flow. They understand the banking system, and they put it to lending money out, and they're earning a tremendous amount of money off the little money that they gave you.
That's a really good point. They don't take your money and park it in a place of trust. They put the money where it's flowing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the kind of the conditioned thinking that we've been subject to. You and I were talking about that just a little bit ago. Is like just we're bombarded with this thought process that, I'm only going to get 0.25%. So really it doesn't matter what I do with my cash. That's what they want you to condition you to think, so that you're willing to give that up to them so they can put it in their machine and make all kinds of money. And that's the problem that we want you to recognize, that you can create this own machine. You can put your own money in your own machine, and now you have control of that supply chain.
And are you saying that the banks aren't looking out for my best interest?
Oh, I would never say that. I'm sure your banker is a lovely person. I'm sure your banker has your best interest at heart. But when it comes time for you, if you can't pay a debt, I'm sure he's going to write the check for you.
Yeah.
Now, anybody that believes that, you probably can hop off this podcast, because I'm sure the IRS and the banks have never looked out for my best interest, ever.
Yeah.
They may come across that they're looking out for you, but in all reality, they're looking out for themselves. They've had a monopoly on this thought process because, again, just because as consumers and people, we become lazy. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I have to say I'm that way sometimes too. So it's lazy from the standpoint of we don't want to challenge our thought process. And this goes back to what Nelson said. We think if banks are making money in this process, why can't we do that? And I shared this idea with somebody. They go, we can do that? I'm like, oh, heck yeah. And I was talking about lending money out to somebody else to use and not being our own customer, like we talked in the grocery store chapter earlier. And the client goes, we can do that? I'm like, yeah, why can't you? You're allowed to borrow. Nicole, if I wanted to borrow you $10,000 because you want to flip a piece of real estate, what's stopping me from doing that? Just my trust in you, right? I'm not going to be if I understand the real estate business, the flipping business, and you're doing it well and you're successful at it, why won't I lend you money and get 15% rate of return on that dollar that I'm going to lend you? People are doing it all the time. In this digital society that we're in, it's happening more and more. And this goes back to the lending process. And Nelson was an Austrian economist. He always said that lending has to be done at the you and me level. These solutions to our problems start at the bottom and work up, not like our current government and banks and everything else, which is a centrally controlled operation. So it starts, their thought process start at the top, and we're going to tell you what to do, and it's going to filter down. Well, the real solution starts at the bottom, at the you and me level, and works up.
Yeah. And one of the things that you have said to me, I have incorporated into my conversations, is that when we think about interest and we think about paying interest, this chapter talks a lot about paying interest for things such as car loans and boat loans and so on and so forth, credit card interest. And we think about bad. But if we flip that around, if we are earning that interest, so if we're charging somebody else the interest, it's not bad for us then.
Interest is good.
But back to this idea that the banks are looking out for their own interest. If we have our own banking, our own financing system, and we're looking out for our own interest, then that interest coming into our little financing system is exactly what we want.
So this goes back to just what we said earlier, right? So we're focusing on the saving side of it. We think, we're going to spend all this time and effort and energy researching our investments. And I think about that. That's not important. But that's the small part of what our income can produce. Imagine if we're spending about 30% of our income just on everything we finance. Think about that. So if we have $100,000 and we're spending $30,000 or $35,000 on interest and payments on everything we do, what if we could take 10% of that over, right? Let's say we're going to take it, well, it'd actually be a third. We're going to take $10,000. Now we're taking control of $10,000 every year. We're not worried about the $1,000 because we're going to get it higher and straight because we're going to take more risk with a broker. Because that's the small thing. That's what I call, that's the choking on the gnats. We have this huge elephant that we should be thinking about chewing up, but we're choking on the gnats, which is the $10,000 that we're saving, not that small, but the interest, the difference in interest, 1% interest. We said it's $1,000. Really, it's $100, right?
Yeah.
It's $100. It's not $1,000. Let's do the math correct. So somebody's going to get us, we're going to spend all this time and effort to get somebody to think about how do we get a 1% more interest rate of return or return on our investment? 1% on $10,000 is what? $100.
Yeah.
All that time and effort for $100, where we could take that time and effort, study this type of material, understand the banking process, and say, oh, if we could take control of 10% of $35,000, which we spend on interest in our lives, and now we can make that $10,000. So it's just focusing on the right thing is really what we're talking about. Because the problem we're having is we're focusing on the wrong thing.
Yeah.
We're focusing on the small number versus focusing on the larger number and how we can take control of that.
Yeah. And it just goes back of controlling as much of the financing in your own life as you can,
100%.
as opposed to giving that control away to who's looking out for their best interest, not my best interest. And it's okay. We all should be looking out for our own best interest, our family's best interest. It's our responsibility.
Right. And this goes back to what Nelson in his book, right, calls becoming your own banker. He didn't say, Nicole becoming your banker or Wade becoming your own banker. He wants you to take control of that function in your life. Look out for your own best interest. I don't want to be a gatekeeper. I want to empower you to be able to do that and take care of that. Where banks want to be the gatekeeper. They want to be a gatekeeper of that pool of money that's out there. Mm-hmm. And then once you understand that that's the problem, right? All we're talking about is controlling the environment of your personal finances, controlling the environment, which is your family financing system. So
one of the stories that he talks about in here is, so he talks about American families, and he's using an example of a guy with his family and how much he makes and how much they're spending on stuff. And then he goes to the water cooler or a coffee break. So you get this young man together with his peers at some such gathering, discussing financial matters. And he says, I can predict what they will talk about, getting a high rate of return on the portion that they are saving. So that goes right back to what we've just been talking about. They're not talking about all the interest that they're paying. They're talking about, I'm getting whatever, 7% on my investments, or I'm getting 1.2% on my savings account or my money market account or whatever that is.
Or they'll talk, I got 27% on the stock I bought, which they bought 1,000 shares of XYZ stock and they got 27%. $27, all that time and effort for $27. Again, they're focusing on the wrong thing.
Yeah. Or it could be similar to a lady that I talked to several weeks ago who searches for these bank offers of you open an account, put so much money in, and if you have 6 deposits over a 6-month period of time, we'll give you $250 or whatever that is. She searches those out so that she can get the free $150, $250 from the bank instead of focusing on.
Yeah, it's kind of like the magic trick or the guy on the street that's going to steal your wallet. You remember this. I remember this. Remember the days back in the days when the banks used to give you a free toaster or whatever the heck it was, right?
Yes.
Come and open an account, you get this free toaster. So we're all enamored with, this free toaster. So we all ran over this free toaster. But we don't look behind the curtain and say, what are they doing with my money? They understand that free toaster costs them almost nothing. But then once your money's there, what do they do with it? They turn it 5, 10, 20 times in a year, and they're making anywhere between 300 and 700% markup on that money. They have us all distracted with what's going on in the left hand while they're making millions of dollars with our deposit with their right hand. And so if that gal would take the same time and effort to understand what the bank is doing with her money versus what they're quote unquote giving her, because they're not giving her anything.
Right.
To them, it's just a small cost of doing business, but she's not willing to take the time or the effort to understand how they're making money in the banking system. And then come to the realization that she can do that herself. Again, there goes back to the problem. She can do this in her own family financing system herself, but she just takes that same principle. And if it's the $250, that's the left hand, right, getting your attention, taking your focus on what's really important. It goes back to the same thing we just talked about. The distraction is focusing on the extra 1 or 2 or 5% that they can earn on that $10,000 if they're really saving $10,000 versus taking control of the $35,000 or $40,000 that they're paying out in financing charges to other institutions. Taking control, that's the real benefit, not the sleight of hand that's going on the other hand that's grabbing their attention.
Yeah.
That's a great example, right? She's spending all that time and money for $250 where she understood what was going on. If she had been talking with you, read Nelson's book, she could be giving away $250 to capture 25,000 so she could turn that and make a tremendous amount of markup. Think about that. If I could give you $250, Nicole, and I could have your money for 6 months or whatever the amount is, and I can make $50,000 off of it, how many toasters would you want to buy? How many toasters as a business would I buy that I could get you to do that? A lot. By the truckload.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Nowadays, they'd probably be giving away like iPads or iPhones or something.
That's when I was a kid. They'd give away toasters and other stuff to open an account. But you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So, and just a really good example of the problem. I shared this story with somebody actually earlier this week, and I had a lot of heads nodding. And it's a great example of what we're talking about. So I don't know if you have this where you live in Indiana. I know you do because actually I've been to some restaurants in your neck of the woods. But some of the better steakhouses, I'm a steakhouse guy. I love steakhouse food. And I see it here where I live here in Fargo. They're doing this. And so I went into the restaurant and it was a new restaurant. Actually, it's been around a while. We just hadn't, because of COVID and all the other stuff, we hadn't been there yet. So we go in there and we go into the restaurant and I'm looking at the menu and they say, our ranch. And this beef comes from our ranch that's out in Amadon, North Dakota. And nobody knows where Amadon, North Dakota is at because it's a bar and a restaurant and a post office. And that's all that's there. But it's out in ranch country, out in western North Dakota. They say, we own this ranch out here and we grow our own beef. And then come to find out that they have a hydroponics operation in Minnesota where they grow their own lettuce and vegetables and stuff like that. And then they have a vineyard just south of town where they grow their own grapes and make their own wine. So what's happening is that this restaurant is buying and taking control of the supply chain in their operation. Why are they doing that? And so I talked to the guy because he's just like, it was so enamoring to me. I'm like, why are you doing that? And he says, for one thing, we control that supply chain, so we're getting a better product. We have more control. We don't have to worry about trucks not being able to deliver a lot of our stuff. We're not going to be out of business because we can't get beef out of Chicago or wherever their beef is coming from. We can't get vegetables out of Mexico, whatever it is. Not that they have 100% control of their supply chain, but they have more than the rest of the restaurants around here. And so people go there and they're enjoying a meal, and the restaurateur now, he doesn't have to worry about those things. What he does, and this is the discussion we had, I said, so do you get your beef from your cattle operation for free? He goes, oh, absolutely not. He said, we charge so that cattle operation is just as profitable as our restaurant. And now what's happened, he's been in business long enough where people or other competition is seeing that. So now he's got his competition buying from him as well. So they're buying part of his supply chain, up his supply chain, right? So how is that any different than what we're teaching? We get people to understand what the problem was. They understood what the problem was. It was the supply chain and have people having the ability to say you can't have beef or pork or vegetables or wine or whatever it is. He saw that as think about it in our context of what we're doing, Nicole, here, right? So we're talking about the flow of money, right? So we need a warehouse of dollars. So when we want to put it into play to run our business or to take advantage of opportunities or whatever it might be, we want to own the full supply chain, or at least as much of that supply chain as we can. So the bank can't come back and say, hey, wait, I know this might be a great idea to buy this land at $1,000 an acre and sell it at $2,000 an acre. But credit is so tight today that we're not going to do it. And that's happened in the past, right?
Yeah.
There's great opportunities to be had when you have access to cash. But we've abdicated the supply chain of our cash and our capital to somebody else.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, Wade, too. And it's one of the things that was difficult in the beginning for me to wrap my head around, in that your cash is a commodity, or it isn't. There's nothing different about it than beef other than it's cash instead of beef.
Right.
So people need beef to eat or to run their restaurants. Go to this guy because he has beef that he's growing and he can sell them the beef. If you have cash, people need money to do things, buy cars or buy land or run a bit and start a business. They can come to you, buy that cash.
100%. Again, we control our own supply chain. That's the first step. And then once we're good at that and we have that constant supply when we need it to the amount we need, then when we look and say, oh, do we have extra capacity? Now should we be selling or using it with I don't want to call it our competition, but other people that maybe that would like to tap into that supply chain. If you're enjoying this podcast or know anyone else that might be interested, please be sure to hit the subscribe button and please leave a review. This will help this podcast reach and help more people by ranking higher in searches and ultimately help more people get out of financial bondage. And don't be afraid to share this podcast with your friends and family, as we can be easily found on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.